I began by priming our Blood Warrior using Army Painter's matte black spray. Then, I applied a quick pre-shading effect using Games Workshop's Corax white primer. To get a good pre-shading effect, you should see mostly white paint when looking at the miniature from above, and mostly black paint when looking at it from below. Try to ensure a smooth finish on the primer by warming the cans in warm water and shaking them thoroughly before use. Next, we start to work on the Blood Warrior's armour using a 50-50 mix of Vallejo Model Air 040 Burnt Umber and Vallejo Model Air 102 Red. This is applied using an airbrush to quickly achieve a thin, even layer of paint. We can immediately see the effect of the pre-shading, giving us some nice colour variation on the armour plates. Then, the armour is highlighted using Vallejo Model Air 102 Red. This is applied to areas of the armour where light would fall, such as the tops of each plate of armour, to build on the colour gradients already established by the pre-shading effect. We continued to highlight the armour, this time using Vallejo Model Air 085 Ferrari Red. To highlight small areas using an airbrush, we dropped the PSI to around 10 and add some more thinner to prevent speckling from the lower air pressure. This allows us to hold the airbrush closer without causing the paint to splatter when it hits the model. For the last stage of airbrushing, we add some Citadel Flash Gitz Yellow to the Ferrari Red to produce a nice fiery orange colour, and then repeat the previous step, this time focusing on even smaller areas. With the airbrush work on the armour complete, the next step is to give the model a coat of gloss varnish. I used Citadel Art Code because I simply didn't have any Vallejo gloss lying around. While this can be applied via brush, using an airbrush helps to ensure a thin and even coat, which will be particularly useful in the next stage. The reason for applying the gloss varnish in the previous step is to allow the Agrax Earthshade wash we're applying now to run into the recesses much easier. It also prevents the wash from sticking to the large flat panels of armour and causing watermarks. This step is very simple, and the only thing to watch out for is the pooling of excess wash, which should be wicked away using a spare paintbrush. Moving on from the armour plates, we begin to lay down the base colour for the golden trim. For this, I'm using Citadel Retributor Armour, which has great coverage and usually only requires one layer to get a good, strong gold finish. Vallejo's liquid gold is an amazing alternative, although it does require isopropanol for thinning rather than water. At this stage, I'm using a size 0 Winsor & Newton Series 7 brush, which I find strikes a good balance between the amount of paint it can hold and the precision of the tip. After base coating the gold trim, we can then move on to painting the Blood Warrior skin. For this I use Citadel Cadian Flesh Tone. This colour was applied in 2 coats to achieve even coverage. The next step is to wash the gold and flesh areas using Citadel Reikland Fleshshade wash. This really helps to make the gold look richer and add more definition to the Blood Warrior skin. After the wash is dry, we can start to pick out the details of the skin by first using Cadian Flesh Tone, and then a 50-50 mix of Cadian Flesh Tone and White Scar. Try to use the second colour sparingly, reserving it for the extreme highlights like the tip of the nose. To apply these highlights, I've switched to a size 000 brush for extra precision. This allows me to paint tiny details like the fingers and lips of the model much easier. With the skin finished, we then moved back to working on the gold trim. To really make the gold pop, we had 2 layers of highlights. This first layer uses Citadel Liberator Gold, which is much paler than the Retributor Armour we used earlier. This paint does have a tendency to separate when left for any extended period of time, so always remember to shake it well before use. Before finishing off the gold trim, we need to lay down some colours on the various bits of steel equipment on the model, like the blade of his axe, bits of chainmail, etc. For this, I'm using Army Painter Warpaints Gunmetal, which I bought because the local game store didn't have any lead voucher in stock. These areas are then all washed using Citadel Nuln Oil. After the wash has dried, we use Citadel Runefang Steel to highlight the metal areas. For the chainmail, this is done via overbrushing, where most of the paint is removed from the paintbrush before gently running it over the area in order to catch small raised details. We also use the Runefang Steel to pick out extreme highlights on the trim, for example, tips of the spikes, corners, etc. With the metallics finished, we can move on to the bone trophies kept by our blood warriors. These are base coated using Citadel's Xandri Dust, once again using 2 layers of paint to achieve even coverage. We also applied this colour to the teeth of his jaw axe contraption. We then wash these areas using Agrax Earthshade. While waiting for the wash to dry, we can begin base coating the boots and haft of his axe using black. I used Army Paint and Matte Black, but you could use pretty much whatever brand of black paint you want, they're basically all the same. After the wash has dried, we begin to highlight the bone areas using Xandri Dust. The final step in painting the bone areas is to make the most defined details and edges stand out even further, using a mix of 50-50 Xandri Dust and White Scar. Next, we add some definition to the black areas using Citadel Asian Grey. Since this colour is pretty dark, you can be quite generous with it. Then, we'll add some extreme edge highlights using Administratum Grey. At this point, I discovered that the colour gradient of the armour was too subtle to be easily noticeable on the tabletop. To remedy this, I decided to add some edge highlights. The first highlight uses Evil Sunz Scarlet and is applied to the upper edges of the armour panels. I then mix some Gitz yellow and white scar into the red to produce a pale orange colour, using it sparingly to add some extreme edge highlights. Now all that's left is to add in the remaining details. I paint all the belts and wrappings using Citadel Dryad Bark to represent a dark leather material. The leather areas were then all highlighted using Citadel Mournfang Brown. The eyes are picked out using Fleshshade's yellow, and the axe scope is painted using Citadel's Aria's purple. It is then washed using Druchii Violet, before the upper portion is highlighted using a 50-50 mix of Xuria's purple and white scar. After this, the Blood Warrior is fully painted, and guaranteed to be more effective on the tabletop. For the base, I decided to go for a light desert sand looking environment with some dead grass flock and some brown grass tufts, which results in a striking contrast between the model and the base that I think works pretty well. I will provide a list of all paints and materials I've used throughout this video in the description below. If you enjoyed watching this marathon of a video, then please leave a like and maybe even subscribe. I intend to produce more videos in a similar vein to this one, covering both Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40k. If you have any suggestions as to what I should paint next or how to improve these videos, then please do leave a comment below.